some friends where we talk about like how they believe that women shouldn't be preachers or women shouldn't be able to talk about God.
Yep.
And how it talks about that in the Bible, or maybe not that specifically.
Right.
And then other friends who are just like, why would someone say that? Like, why would someone want to like put women behind men? So I just want to hear like your thoughts on that and
you bet.
What you think.
Well, Phoebe was trained by Paul, right? She was tremendously close. Paul raised her up as a leader who was preaching to men. Then you have an ancient manuscript where one Roman emperor wrote to another talking about how we have been persecuting and we have been slashing and doing things probably similar to waterboarding to this disciple of Christ who was a woman. And disciple referencing her as a leader. So, women in leadership? Absolutely. Now, to the point of, were they specifically pastors? Well, the word pastor is not in the Bible. People don't believe me when I say that. Look up and try and find the word pastor in the Bible. It's not. We're both pastors, so sometimes we wonder, what in the world are we doing being pastors? It's not in the Bible. Now, women, though, in that Roman Empire, they were considered dirt. So were children. The typical male in the Roman Empire was allowed to have one sex slave, one wife, as well as another mistress, and treat them however he wanted to. No woman can go and say, hey, I'm part of the Me Too movement, for example. It was Christians that came along and said, no, we have to find a way to do away with this. We have to find a way to uplift women and say all are created in the image of God. That's when the Roman Empire started to change, and the majority of the early church and the church today is by far and away female.
That's a great issue you're raising. Why? Because I meet a lot of women today who say, I am really angry about the sexism in our culture. And I look those ladies in the face and I say, I'm right with you. For a man to look down on a woman as inferior is sick. But the question is, why is woman valuable? And here's the answer that I get from too many of my feminist friends. Woman is valuable because she's just like a man. That's a pathetic reason that woman is valued. I hope, ladies, you don't think you're valuable because you're just like men. Because now you're still begging the question, why are men and women valuable? And I can promise you a woman is not valuable because she's just like a guy. No, false. The Bible gives us the basis for the value of every man, every woman, every transgender, every LGBTQ, every racist, every ethnic heritage person in the world. And the basis is God created every single one of us in his image. What do you think that man stood for? Exactly what I just said. Dr. Martin Luther King understood. All human beings are created in the image of God. That is why racism is wrong. Because racism is saying, I'm inferior, I'm superior, and you are inferior. And that is a lie. That is arrogance. It's demeaning a person. God created every single human being in his likeness, in his image, which means we all have equal value and dignity. You take God out of the picture, and I'll tell you why woman's valuable. Because our culture says, if your body's proportioned correctly, you're a babe. You're valuable. What a crock. Our culture says, man, if you've been in the weight room a lot and you're buff, you're a stud. You're somebody significant. That's a lie. Our culture says, if you got a 4.0 GPA, whoa, you're somebody. That's a lie. I've got a sister who's mentally challenged. I got a brother who transplants kidneys at Duke University Hospital in North Carolina. I can promise you, my brother, who's a transplant surgeon, is not more valuable than my sister, who's at a third grade educational level at the age of 59. And if anybody goes to my brother and says, whoa, you know, you're really valuable, and your sister, who's mentally challenged, is a loser, my brother intellectually will bust the dude's chops. Why? Because you got to think. Why are any of us valuable? If there is no God, none of us are valuable innately. We just give ourselves value, or our culture gives us value. if we happen to be a winner instead of a loser? Guys, think. You've got to think this stuff through. No God, you're an accident, I'm an accident. If there is a God who created you in his image, you and I both have intrinsic, innate value. It's that simple.
But what about salvation? Why God already knows who's going to be saved and who isn't, so why is that not predetermined?
Good. For the same reason that God knows what I'm going to choose to do tomorrow when it comes to how I treat students out here, because he's outside of the dimension of time. God knows whether I'm going to choose to accept Christ and put my faith in him. And he knows that about you and about all of us. He's all-knowing. He's outside of the dimension of time. The idea that I'm just going to keep on living and living and living is a joke. I'm 69 years old. I can promise you I can't run as fast as I used to. I can't jump as high as I used to. This body is decaying. That's a fact, right?
Yeah.
So I am locked into time, and time does things to my body. Time does things to life. God is outside of that dimension of time. He's eternal.
All right.
See, God doesn't get tired. I get tired. God doesn't get tired.
The four Gospels are the story of Jesus, and we want to make sure it's accurate. How come there's some inconsistencies between the four of them? For example, the one I'm thinking of is like the story of the fig tree. Jesus like curses a fig tree, and one gospel says it withered immediately, and then one gospel said later on in the day it was withered. So there's some, and there's another one with like the genealogy of Christ. There's two different genealogies, and they're different.
Yep.
So how can we still like trust the gospel if there's those inconsistencies?
Good question. When you talk about inconsistencies, read them carefully. Realize that perspective is crucial. You and I are standing on a street corner. We see two cars come down the road. There's a screech of brakes. A woman screams, and there's a collision. If you and I go to the police and you say, "Officer, I saw the two cars coming down the street. A woman screamed and there was a collision." And I say, "Officer, I saw the two cars coming down the street. I heard a screech of brakes and there was a collision." Are you and I contradicting each other? No. No. Exactly. We are offering two equally valid perspectives on what really happened. There's a book called The Day Lincoln Was Shot. Does that book record every second of Lincoln's last 24 hours? Every thought, every imagination, every deed? No. What is history? History is a selective account of what happens. No history book gives us every detail. None. That is why we want different eyewitness accounts to get different perspectives on what really happened. Now, if you have a contradiction in a text, then we have got a problem. But I would argue that the two genealogies in Luke 3 and Matthew 1 do not contradict each other. There are some options. One option that I take seriously is, one of Luke's main points is, Jesus was not born literally, physically, as a son of Joseph. He was born of a virgin, Mary. And so Luke gives us Mary's genealogy, tracing back to Abraham, and Matthew gives us Joseph's genealogy, tracing back to Abraham, showing that clearly from both Mary's lineage and Joseph's lineage, Jesus was the line of Messiah. The fig tree, when you have words like immediately or at the end of the day, be very careful there. Very careful. Right? I mean, immediately, what does immediately mean? Mark continuously in the Gospel of Mark says, and immediately, right away, Jesus went and did this. Well, that doesn't mean that he literally just right away went and did that. Mark is a writer who uses a lot of action, and Jesus is bopping around. He's writing for Romans, who are action-oriented people, and so Mark records that.